Hey everybody, it's Ms. DeFazio. I wanted to go over a strategy that you have seen, maybe haven't used explicitly quite yet, called adding the opposite. This is to be used with subtraction problems, and it's a method and strategy that makes it easier to solve these problems, and it's another way of solving them. So this strategy is, like I said, called adding the opposite. You will be adding the opposite, and I'm going to do a couple of examples to go over this with you. The first thing that is important with this is that you are turning subtraction problems into addition problems. So while adding the opposite, you will be transforming subtraction problems into addition problems. So because of this, you will use the strategy adding the opposite for subtraction problems. So when you see subtraction, you can always use add the opposite. And then here I just said adding the opposite just makes it easier to model and think about subtraction problems because, as you've probably seen, questions like this, -1 minus -4, it's kind of a lot to look at, a lot of negative signs, a subtraction sign. All of this could get, just confusing. So adding the opposite is going to be a way to look at this and model this and solve this, but it's going to be much easier. We're going to turn it into an addition problem. Before we start doing examples, it's important to know and think about why we can add the opposite. Why does turning these subtraction problems into addition problems keep them the same? If you remember from the hot air balloon, taking away bags of sand makes your hot air balloon lighter. It makes your hot air balloon rise. Adding bags of gas makes your balloon also rise. So taking away bags of sand, subtracting away bags of sand, and adding bags of gas both make your hot air balloon rise. This will be connected to adding and subtracting because if you're taking away a bag of sand, you're subtracting negatives. If you're adding bags of gas, you're adding positives. So taking away bags of sand or subtracting a negative number is the same thing as adding bags of gas or adding a positive number. So let me use a different color here. We're subtracting a negative, which is the example I have above, the example I have up here. We're subtracting a negative. We're turning that into adding a positive. And we're going to see examples where you're not subtracting a negative. Maybe you're just subtracting a positive. We're going to do some examples with that as well. So the easiest way to understand this is to look at a couple problems and solve them as we follow some steps. So the first thing we're going to do is write down our steps. If you have a notebook or you have a piece of paper that you've been doing problems on, or you have a folder, I would get that out and just write down these steps because these are the steps you're going to use when you add the opposite and when you do subtraction problems, basically from here on out. So the first step, and these steps will make a lot more sense when you actually see one of the problems I'm going to do with you. The first step is you're going to keep the first number the same. Don't change the first number. This is one of the biggest misunderstandings, the biggest mistakes that we will see is where people are going to add the opposite, but also mess up the first number. In this example up here, -1, that's our starting point. If we're using a number line, we're drawing our first arrow to the left to -1. that absolutely will not change. When you add the opposite, your first number stays exactly the same. Your second step is to change subtraction to addition. And this is, you're going to do exactly what it sounds like. You're taking your subtraction sign and you're switching it into addition. Your third step is to take the opposite of the last number, or the second, I should say. Now, if you remember, when I say take the opposite, hopefully you're kind of thinking to yourself, like, Ms. DeFazio, I know what the opposite of a number is. That's where if it's positive, your second number is positive, you're going to turn it into a negative. If it's a negative number, you're going to change it to positive. So it's the opposite sign. And that's either positive or negative. So again, steps, keep the first number the same. You don't change the first number, change subtraction to addition, and you take the opposite of that second number. Move some of this stuff. Try to keep this in frame here. So as I do the next question, or our first example. All right, so we're going to do two examples together. First example, we're going to do 2 minus 7. Now, some people might know this off the top of your head by just doing subtraction. That's awesome if that's the case. Some people can't. You will be asked to change this into subtraction, into addition, whether you need to or not, because we need to know that you are able to change it from subtraction into addition. So if I'm following my first steps, keep the first number the same. Don't change the first number. It's pretty easy. I'm just keeping positive 2 as positive 2. I am not turning positive 2 into a negative number. Positive 2 is positive 2. Second step, change subtraction to addition. Again, seems pretty straightforward. So this subtraction is turning into addition. So our 2 is staying with 2. Subtraction is turning into addition. And you're doing 2 minus 7. And it says to take the opposite of the second number. Well, if my second number is 7, the opposite of 7, positive 7, is negative 7. So my 7 is kind of turning into negative 7. 2 plus negative 7 is equal to 2 minus 7. We'll look at this really quick on a number line. And this is going to be a very rough picture. 1, 2, 3. Okay, first thing, 2 is my starting number in this, and it's my starting number here. So I'm drawing my arrow to the right to 2. Not changing. Always your starting number. And for our second arrow, we're either subtracting 7. Now, if I'm subtracting 7, my arrow is going to the left. If I'm adding a negative 7, my arrow is also going to the left. 7 spaces. So I'm going to go from 2 all the way 7 spaces, and I'm going to end up at negative 5. I'm going to write this like this, negative 7. So I positive 2, and we can think of this as minus 7 or adding a negative 7. And my answer for both is going to be negative 5. For this next one, it's going to be a little maybe a little bit trickier. We're going to have a couple more negative signs. Second example, we're going to do -3 minus -4. -3 minus -4. Okay. Same steps. Keep the first number the same. Again, pretty easy. Do not change the first number. I'm going to keep -3. I'm actually going to change this color altogether. I don't love this light blue. It's hard to see. My -3 is staying -3. Do not change your first number. It's probably the easiest step in math. It's just hard to remember because you're going to be tempted to change it. Second step, change subtraction to addition. All right, so here's my subtraction sign. I'm turning that into an addition sign because I'm adding the opposite. I'm not subtracting anymore. And just like the name says, take the opposite of your second number. Now, this is another reason why putting your second number in parentheses is helpful, because I see this second number as -4. All right, well, if I'm taking the opposite of -4, the opposite of -4 is +4. So this whole -4, the opposite is +4. So I kept my first number the same as -3, subtraction into addition, -4, the opposite is +4. Okay, now you might know this off the top of your head. Awesome if you do. If not, just like we did before, I'm going to draw a quick number line. And this will be the last example. Quick number line. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So again, whether I'm doing this subtraction or this addition mean the same exact thing. Remember, these two expressions, these two problems are exactly the same thing. They're just written different. They just look a little bit different. So we're starting out at -3. So from 0, I'm drawing an arrow to -3. Here and here, both -3. Now, this is when addition is much easier to think about, because if I'm adding 4 right off the bat, adding a positive, I know my arrow is going to be going to the right. I don't even have to think about that. I'm adding a 4. You're adding +4, move to the right 4 spaces. If you're doing it with subtracting a negative, you're not subtracting a positive, you're not moving to the left, you're subtracting a negative, so you're still moving to the right. But again, this +4, personally, I think is much easier to model by just moving to the right instead of having to think about subtracting a negative if that means moving to the right or moving to the left. So my final answer here is going to be +1. I hope those examples helped. Please email with any questions. And remember, these two expressions, your subtraction and your addition, mean the same exact thing. You'll get the same exact answer. They're the same exact problem. Your number lines look exactly the same. Addition is just easier to look at. You don't have all of these negative signs in here. Instead of -3 minus -4, you have a -3 plus 4. -3 to the left, 4 to the right, and you're going to come up with your answer.